Hello and welcome to Inside the Americas. I'm Delano D'Souza. Coming up on the show this week, Joe Biden says he's mulling personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin if he invades Ukraine. The latest threat comes as $200 million of American military equipment lands in Kiev. The environmental after effects of an oil spill in Peru continue to linger, locals helping the cleanup effort by donating their hair. And Jamaica's bobsled team qualifies for the Winter Olympics in Beijing. It's the first time the country will be participating in the event in some 24 years. But first, Joe Biden says he isn't ruling out personal sanctions on Russian President Vladimir Putin if he invades Ukraine. The threat from the US president comes as tensions between Moscow and the West continue to heat up. On Tuesday, the third installment of US military equipment landed in Kiev, and over 8,000 American troops stationed in Europe have been placed on standby. Wasim Cornet reports.
It was a quick one-liner that did not go unnoticed.
Would you ever see yourself personally sanctioning him if he did invade Ukraine?
Yes.
You would?
I would see that.
U.S. President Joe Biden floating the possibility of imposing sanctions on Vladimir Putin himself if the Russian president orders an invasion of Ukraine. As tensions continue to flare, questions have been raised over what Western nations could do to both deter Russia from going ahead with military action and retaliate if it does. First up, reduce Europe's dependency on Russian gas. The EU relies on Russia for around a third of its natural gas supplies. Any disruption to that could exacerbate the energy crisis on the continent. The White House says it's looking for alternatives.
But we've also been working to identify additional volumes of non-Russian natural gas from North Africa and the Middle East, Asia, and the United States.
The U.S. could also use sanctions on banking and finance to hit back against Russia. One of the toughest steps, cutting the country out of the SWIFT financial system, which shuffles money from bank to bank around the world. It would block Russia from most international transactions, despite the country attempting to develop its own financial transfer system with limited success. Suspending the country's access to transactions in dollars is on the cards too. Washington is also considering banning the export of American technology to major Russian sectors such as artificial intelligence and the highly lucrative aerospace and arms industries. Although the list of options is long and complex, the Biden administration says whatever is decided will be stronger than the sanctions that were imposed on Russia when it annexed Crimea 8 years ago.
Now, the US president was caught on camera this week mocking a Fox News reporter. When asked if inflation was a political liability ahead of the midterms, the president responded sarcastically, calling the journalist a stupid son of a bitch. Fanir Andrea Mihaja from our social media team explains.
Having access to patents or anything else had to sign a non-compete clause.
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
Literally to hundreds of dollars, saving people hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And people competition results in lower prices for families.
Our image of the week next is of an oil spill off the coast of Peru. The environmental after effects continue as the government has declared a 90-day environmental emergency. Zookeepers from Lima Central Zoo have now joined the effort to rescue birds affected by the slick, and members of the public are also helping with the cleanup by donating their hair. Fraser Jackson explains.
Faced with a hairy situation, Peruvians are donating their locks to help mop up an environmental disaster. With oil lapping at their shores, a national drive has been organized for people to give up their hair to make floats that will soak it up.
Que todas las personas deberían venir a hacer la donación para poder ayudar al medio ambiente, ¿no?
De verdad que es muy lamentable pero poco a poco todos nos estamos uniendo. Todos los peruanos estamos apoyando de esta manera. Y me alegra un montón que haya un montón de cola, como ves, y todos queremos poner la mano, ¿no?
These oil-absorbing sausages are sometimes stuffed with synthetic spongy materials, but human hair has been found to be a good renewable alternative. Peru's cleanup teams have a big job on their hands. On January 15th, an underwater volcano erupted near the Pacific island of Tonga. Freak waves produced by the event damaged an oil tanker operated by Spanish firm Repsol. Oil has now devastated swathes of the Peruvian coastline, with the Peruvian government seeking compensation from Repsol. Some of the area affected is a hotspot for biodiversity. Efforts are ongoing to rescue several species of animal, including the protected Humboldt penguin.
Here's a look at some of the other stories from the continent making headlines this week, starting with Guatemala.
30 years prison for sexual crimes committed during Guatemala's civil war. 5 former paramilitary soldiers were sentenced to jail for the rape of 5 indigenous women between 1981 and 1985. 29 more women said they also suffered abuse at the hands of pro-government militia, but did not directly identify the defendants. Justice, finally, for the victims, decades after the crimes.
We must continue to seek justice. We hope that the state will compensate us for everything that has happened.
The case is not yet closed, with investigations into the role of the military in the abuse expected to continue for years. Outrage across Mexico after the murder of a second journalist within a week. Lourdes Maldonado was gunned down on Sunday, 6 days after Margarito Martinez, both in the city of Tijuana. Both had requested government protection.
Lourdes Maldonado attended the vigil we held for Margarito Martinez on Friday. It seems incredible that we are reliving everything we went through with Margarito, now with Lourdes.
Nationwide protests took place on Tuesday to repeat a years-old demand to the government to step up protection of journalists in what is, along with Afghanistan, the world's most dangerous country for the profession.
The brutal reality of Mexico nowadays is that the federal, state and municipal governments simply don't investigate the crimes against the population in general and against the human rights activists and journalists.
3 journalists have been killed in Mexico since the start of the year. At least 7 were murdered in 2021. Houses destroyed, bridges and railroads washed away as devastating floods swept the area surrounding the ancient Inca site of Machu Picchu. Nearly 900 tourists have been evacuated from the area, which serves the jewel of Peru's travel industry. 1 person has been hurt and another is missing since torrential rains last week caused the El Camayo River to overflow.
We are delivering donations such as food, blankets, mattresses as a matter of prevention. We should point out that this is still going to take a few more days because after the cleanup, one of the bridges has to be reopened so that tourists can enter Machu Picchu and for the population as a whole.
The rail link that serves Machu Picchu had already been slated for suspension due to previous flooding damage. Experts have long warned of the impacts of over-tourism on the ancient site amid an increase in landslides, fires and creeping development. Outside COVID times, Machu Picchu draws some 1.5 million visitors per year.
To our number of the week next, and it's 530,000. That's the number of simultaneous views on Twitch of a preview of a Netflix documentary on football star Neymar registered over in his native Brazil. Neymar, the perfect chaos, takes a look at the player's life, moving from his childhood in Sao Paulo to him winding up in Paris with PSG. A way for the player to soften his somewhat controversial image, Neymar lost his sponsorship deal with Nike a year ago over sexual abuse accusations. He has denied any wrongdoing. Now, the Jamaican bobsled team, nicknamed Fire on Ice, have qualified for the Winter Olympics in Beijing next month. It's the first time the country will be participating in the event in 24 years. The Caribbean team's unexpected entry in the sport in the 1988 Games in Calgary even inspired a Disney movie. Olivia Salazar-Winspear reports.
From Caribbean sunshine to the chilly slopes of the Yanqing district of Beijing, the Jamaican bobsleigh team is headed to this year's Winter Olympics. They're billing it as Fire on Ice. Now the whole island's rooting for their athletes, including Nimroy Turgot, who's never made it to the international event before.
Everyone is extremely happy for me because they see how I train and how serious I am about sports, like waking up 4:30 in the morning to do a training session.
It's the first time the team has qualified in 24 years. The country will also compete in the women's monobob. The new event has been added to the Olympic roster by the IOC. And Jamaica's Jasmine Fenlater Victorians tipped to wear the green and gold colours of her flag at that race after she participated in the 2018 Games in South Korea. Despite this flurry of excitement, the Jamaican athletes are not quite in pole position, as equipment is limited and training in a country with no snowfall presents significant challenges. An online fundraiser for vital resources has raised some $7,000 so far, but it's still some way off their target of almost $200,000. The Jamaican team fears that a lack of financial support could give the advantage to the bobsleigh frontrunners, Germany.
Because we have the athletes, Jamaica definitely have the athletes, but when it comes equipment-wise, we don't have the best equipment, but we're not complaining. We have to go out there and use what we have and perform to the best of our ability to represent our beautiful country, Jamaica.
Jamaica's bobsleigh team made their debut at the Winter Games in Calgary in 1988, beating all odds to qualify and inspiring the Disney film Cool Runnings. Since then, they've enjoyed a warm welcome at the Olympics, however chilly the weather.
That's it for this edition of Inside the Americas. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.
France is famous for food, fashion, and when it comes to the winter months, skiing.
Well, France is considered one of the top destinations in the world when it comes to winter sports, les sports d'hiver, and it's a significant part of the country's tourism industry.
Ski culture, though, is about much more than the slopes, and this being France, a lot of that has to do with food.
But has skiing gotten too expensive, and how can resorts cope with climate change?
Join us as we slalom through the ins and outs of French skiing.
French Connections Plus, presented by Jeannie Godula and Florence Guillemino.